Hello. I have always held moral high ground when dealing with personal trivial matters. I've had a couple failed relationships that taught me to not trust most females, but I still believe in love, hoping it finds me with a good lady. I am also a commissioned officer of the United States Army, a honor I hold in high prestige and always answer the call when duty calls. My personal marital situation with my wife, however, has become a pain in my heart. Things went bad between us, and this time, I went full savage mode as I refused to be a gentleman anymore to these females. I carried out a petty retribution revenge, which I'm not proud of, but this is my story. I am 39 years old. I met my wife 3 years ago when she had just moved out of her small hometown and moved to Texas. I had just gotten out of the military after 7 years of duty and 2 tours under my belt. To be honest, becoming a normal civilian was not easy after my combat experiences, but I will save the details on that and focus on my marriage ordeal. My wife was much younger at the age of 25, but we met at a local bar one night. I was drinking away my tour horrors. She was by herself also, and I managed to walk up to her to strike up a conversation. She seems cool and we hit it off well. She was making me feel normal again, and I was loving her presence and being around her increasingly every day. So, after a few months we had been together, I found out that my wife used to have a bad drug use issue in the past. She told me being around me had helped her kick the bad habit, and I was proud that she overcame her demon as she was helping me overcome mine as well. It seemed we both helped each other fill a void in our lives as we complemented each other, and this further intensified our romance. Our relationship began to grow even more as I proposed to her, and she agreed. Shortly after we got married, my wife told me she had always wanted to join the military and went ahead with enlistment into the Navy shortly after our marriage. I was not the biggest fan of the idea of my now wife joining the military. I thought my military experience was in the past. I explained how being in the military can be psychologically draining if she wasn't mentally prepared as I was. Even though I found the duty fulfilling and it's my pride to call myself a vet, it still took me to some dark places mentally as my therapist was still helping me recover. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't my influence and swayed her into joining the service. I decided not to persuade her against it but supported her decision, playing my role as a good husband. Before she joined the military, however, things had become rocky in our marriage. I tried to think in my head and pinpoint exactly where things went wrong, but I simply could not place it. I have been a good provider, her defender, and pampered her with love and abundance. She just started to seem more irritated at me for little to no reason. It was boggling. Where was the love we started and built our marriage on? I just hoped I hadn't rushed into a lifetime commitment without fully knowing my wife. She was my light at the end of tunnel, but the light is now flickering and dimming out. When I tried to talk to her, she would tell me things are fine but admitted our love seems to be fading. I don't want my wife falling out of love with me, so I cranked up the time activities we spent together. I would make sure every Friday night was dinner date and watch a movie afterwards. I started running with her every Saturday morning as she was raising her fitness and endurance to join the Navy. I would even go grocery shopping with her, and every chance I get I spend with her. At some point, she started to say I was overbearing and pushing myself onto her wasn't helping. I was making these efforts, but it was futile. I tried to reconnect with her through the things we enjoyed doing together before we got married, but she won't even sleep on the same bed with me anymore after our first year of marriage. She would say the bed was too soft and we needed a firm mattress for her back issues. The same back issues she had no problem sleeping on the couch with or in the other room. We're a new couple. I told her I wanted to sleep in the other room with her, but she would produce flimsy excuses, like it was too small to accommodate us both. I suggested we buy a Tempur-Pedic, but it was apparent she just wasn't interested, so I would let things go. She would occasionally come to sleep on our bed. Things was weird out of nowhere, or maybe, if I were to take some accountability, I was blinded to my wife losing love interest in me till it was too late. I simply thought everything was all right between us and couldn't read the signs early enough. After her first deployment, what was getting worse became much worse. I couldn't lean in to kiss my wife any longer or show public display of affection because she would cringe and tell me no. Lovemaking was non-existent at this point. She would tell me I reminded her of the time she had a bad forceful encounter and was taken advantage of. No husband likes to hear these types of comments from his wife, and being described to in a word violator was heart-sinking. I didn't deserve this, and it was not fair. I told her if I had offended her, she should tell me so I could apologize, but she wouldn't open to me. I wasn't diagnosed, but I'm sure I went into depression over my wife's mental abuse treatment and felt even lonelier than I was before I met her. My mental stress level was off the chart, but I tried to hang in there hoping my wife would come around. She went for her second deployment, and when she came home this time, she told me she wanted to divorce. My heart sank further. After I heard this, honestly, it felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer and landed multiple blows to my heart. It felt like it was about to explode. I told her I thought we were working on issues. I told her I didn't even know we had issues or what her issues was in the first place, and that's when she laid it on me that she was having an affair. This was the nail in the coffin for me. I asked her how long this has been going on, and she truthfully confessed it has been about 6 months into our marriage at this point. I was now getting furious at myself because I should have known. I wept like a baby that day, even though I was raging, and all what I kept asking was why? 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 I had gone years thinking I did something wrong and tried everything to make things right. She could have spared me the emotional heartache. What was the point of telling me she cheated on me anyway? I wanted to know details about who her secret lover was, and she told me it was a Navy guy she had been seeing around the same time she got engaged to me. Apparently, she developed a thing for men in uniform after she met me and wanted to know more about that lifestyle, the battle stories, and overall experiences. When I wasn't too forthcoming with my stories because of my battle scars, she found someone who was willing to share such stories with her, and they fell in love along the way. At least that was what I interpreted the nonsense she was spewing to me as an explanation. Her secret lover even encouraged her to join the service. When she explained the chronological timeline of the whole thing, it was so baffling to me that I just accepted my fate, that I've been a fool in love the whole time. Even worse than a simp, because here I was drowning myself with drinks every night and driving myself into a dark place mentally the whole time. It had nothing to do with me but a sick wife's uniform fetish. Or, what do I make of this predicament? She told me she was sorry and that I could start seeing someone else. All I got in her remorse was sorry. The last couple years of my life with her came down to one word: sorry. She went low, and I was ready to snap out of feeling sorry for myself and play in the mud. I started to plot how to get back at her in a petty outrage. First, I told her before I signed the divorce papers, we must see a marriage counselor. Whatever plan she has to go, running to her side lover has to wait, because I wasn't ready to sign. This was out of pure spite because she desperately wanted me to sign, as if her lover had given her an ultimatum to break up with me. I became equally disengaged and even started to bring women home into our marital bed as she's half asleep on the silly couch. I told the ladies I bring home that I had a roommate staying with me and not to worry when they see her when we entered the house. I would tell the girls that my wife was the roommate I was telling them about. They would even say hi and addressed her as roommate, and we would just go into my matrimonial bed with the door shut. I dared her to bring her lover into the house I was paying the mortgage on and see what happens. I stopped caring about her, and to my surprise, when I stopped giving her attention, she started to try to initiate engagements and conversations with me. I simply ignored her and respectively made life unbearable for her. She told me we should separate before we finalized the divorce, and I would simply tell her she should feel free to get the heck out of my house. I refused to move to a hotel. I don't know why, but she wouldn't move out either. She booked the counseling sessions and told me we can go for therapy like I wanted, and I would always give her reasons why I couldn't make it. Sometimes I would even tell her I was on my way and wouldn't show after she had paid for the session. My irresponsible actions were now starting to get to her, and she started heavy drinking and eventually went back to her past days of drug use. I took my pettiness to the extreme when I called her command and police to report her for using. I had been working with Naval Criminal Investigative Services, NCIS, to build a case against her. Recorded her videos and collected evidence when she was unsuspecting as I mounted cameras in the house. I didn't care if the videos were admissible or not, but I provided them anyway. She got kicked out of the Navy shortly after getting her promotion and was about to re-enlist to get a huge bonus. She won't be able to use her GI Bill, and it would be hard for her to get a decent job. Her rise to fame and grace became shame and disgrace, and even lost some of her friends along the way. I came home one evening, went straight to her closet, and signed her divorce papers where I had kept them. I'm still not satisfied because I don't think she went through half the emotional pain I went through, but this would suffice for now. Whoever said two wrongs don't make a right has never met an emotionally wrecked man. It was an especially cold December morning when Stuart got into his car's icy cabin. After starting the engine, he warmed it up a little and drove cautiously onto the nearly empty road. Stuart was on his way to a neighboring town to make a deal with a new supplier of auto parts for his store. Recently, he had been unlucky with suppliers, so he hoped that this time the negotiations would go well. Thankfully, Stuart was right this time. He was able to agree on shipments that were supposed to start from the new year. After shaking hands with his new partner, he went outside. Delighted with the successful deal, Stuart decided to stop by a store and buy a gift for his wife, Emily. He pulled up near a shopping center, walked among the many stores, and chose a beautiful watch for Emily with a gold-plated case from an expensive boutique. By the time Stuart left the city, it was already dark and heavy snow had started to fall. Visibility on the road was rapidly deteriorating, and even with the headlights on and the windshield wipers working, it was almost impossible to see anything in the distance. When Stuart drove onto an intersection, he only had time to notice something dark on the left with his peripheral vision. He started to brake, but it was already too late. A heavy logging truck that had jumped onto the highway easily knocked Stuart's car off the road, crushing the driver's side with its huge bumper. "Hey, how are you there? Are you alive?" Stuart struggled to open his eyes and saw through the broken glass the face of an unfamiliar man. The man immediately got busy, tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. Then he ran for a pry bar and with difficulty, but broke the battered door and picking Stuart up by the arms, dragged him outside. Stuart gathered his strength, turned his head, looked at his feet, and was horrified that his feet were completely crushed and left bloody tracks in the snow. His last strength left him, and Stuart lost consciousness. He woke up in the hospital. The first thing he did was try to move his toes, and realizing they were gone, moaned in pain and despair. A gray-haired doctor came into the ward, carefully examined his bandaged limbs, and seeing the patient suffering on his face, said, "Well, calm down, please. It's not as bad as it could have been. You lost a lot of blood, and it's just a miracle that you survived." Emily arrived in the evening, tears in her eyes, as she sat down next to him and took his hand in hers. Stuart looked at her and remembered buying her a watch at the store and groaned at his own foolishness. "I stopped by the store to buy you a watch. Why couldn't I have just stayed home?" he muttered. "Stuart, everything will be good, don't worry." His wife tried to reassure him, holding his hand tighter. "What's so good about this? Who needs me now?" Stuart said irritably. "Tell Graham to manage the store himself from now on," he added, turning to the wall. After being discharged, Emily suggested that Stuart live in his late grandfather's old house outside the city, surrounded by nature. Stuart agreed, seeing it as a good idea. Emily packed her husband's things in a suitcase and one more time offered to hire a caregiver for Stuart, but he angrily refused. He got out of bed to show her that he could take care of himself, but a sharp pain in his lower back forced him back onto the bed. Gritting his teeth to keep from screaming in pain, he made another attempt and moved to his wheelchair, showing his wife that he didn't need anyone's help. With a proud look, he left the room. Everything in his grandfather's house was as simple as ever, but beautiful in its own way. Stuart gazed at his grandfather's portrait and suddenly remembered what he was like when he was alive. Although it had been 5 years since his passing, Stuart still vividly remembered his grandpa. He remembered his face, overgrown with stiff bristles, and his old crumpled work shirt, stained with gasoline and tobacco. He wore it all the time, taking it off only for washing. Grandfather died 5 years ago, but Stuart still missed him. These memories took him back to the distant past. He remembered the times when his mother was still alive, before she was diagnosed with cancer. Every morning she used to make him pancakes and carrot fritters, which he loved. It all felt so close now that Stuart completely withdrew into himself and sat in his wheelchair, hypnotized. "Stuart, are you even listening to me?" Emily called out to him. "I might be leaving soon. Don't miss me too much. I'll be back. And call me if you need anything." "Okay," Stuart nodded. "Don't forget about me while you're gone." He joked, but his wife flinched at his words. "How can you say that?" Emily said, offended. Then she kissed her husband goodbye and left quietly. Stuart watched as the heavy door closed behind his wife, and at that moment it seemed to him that he had lost her for the last time. He instinctively jerked forward, but a sharp pain pierced his back, and he, groaning, wearily sank into his wheelchair. A month passed. At first, Emily called Stuart almost every day, inquiring about his health, offering help, but then her calls became less frequent and finally stopped altogether. Stuart, in a troubled foreboding, tried to reach Emily himself, but her phone did not answer. Stuart guessed that Emily had left him and decided to live her own life, so he soon gave up his attempts to contact her. Deep down, he understood his wife, because not everyone can find the strength to take on such a heavy burden as him, but resentment firmly settled in his heart and did not give him peace, neither day nor night. One evening, lost in troubled thoughts, Stuart suddenly heard the gate creak outside. He looked out the window, but it was already quite dark outside, and he didn't see anyone. Thinking that he had imagined it, he was about to immerse himself in his thoughts again, but then he clearly heard a knock on the door. "It's open, come in," Stuart called out, wondering who could come to visit him at this time. The door opened and, to his surprise, Stuart saw his neighbor, Penelope, standing on the threshold. She was petite, slender, and modestly dressed. He looked her up and down and gestured for her to sit at the table. The girl walked timidly into the room and sat down opposite. "Hi, Stuart," she said. "I was passing by and saw the lights in the window, so I decided to stop by. How long have you been here?" "It's been a month. I just haven't left the house," Stuart said gloomily as he rolled out from behind the table, demonstrating his wheelchair. "What happened to you?" Penelope exclaimed concernedly. Stuart wearily waved his hand and told Penelope the story. He had barely finished when they heard a noise from outside, and then someone, drunk, started calling out for Penelope rudely. "Is that your stepfather?" Stuart asked. The girl sadly nodded and explained that her stepfather had been drinking heavily for a long time, almost lost his mind, and life with him at home had become unbearable for her. Penelope could have gone to the city to study, but without money it was impossible, and there was nowhere to earn money in the village. Shivering from the cold, Penelope approached the stove to warm her hands and turned to Stuart. "Can I stay with you tonight? I'm scared to go back home." "He'll definitely beat me." Stuart nodded and suggested that Penelope choose any place she felt comfortable. While wincing in pain, he approached the stove and removed a pot of potatoes from the burner. Seeing Stuart's anguish, Penelope took the pot from him and helped set the table. "You need to see Mr. Khazard," she advised. "People come from all over the region to see him. He'll fix your back right away, that sorcerer." Stuart laughed, recalling old Mr. Khazard living in the forest. "He's a healer," Penelope corrected him sternly. "Last summer I dislocated my leg and he fixed it so well that there wasn't even a trace left." Stuart waved his hand, promising to visit Mr. Khazard somehow, and suggested Penelope distract herself from the conversation and finally have dinner. A month passed. Penelope visited Stuart every day, helped with the household chores, chatted with him over a cup of tea, and once brought Mr. Khazard to his place. He immediately examined Stuart, running his fingers over his spine and pressing on one of the vertebrae so hard that Stuart almost passed out. Mr. Khazard told him to endure a little and repeated his manipulations several more times. "Done," he said, patting Stuart gently on the back. "It won't hurt you anymore." Stuart smiled incredulously, but within a few hours he realized that he really felt better. Within a couple of days, he could easily turn his torso, bend and straighten his back, and even while sitting in his wheelchair, he could do housework. He went out to the garden for the first time and put the plot in order, and didn't even feel tired. Returning to the house, he realized for the first time in months that there were pleasant moments in life. But before he could enjoy this new feeling, he was startled by the unexpected sound of the phone ringing. It was Martha, Emily's sister. She struggled to find the right words for a while, but eventually she gathered the courage to tell Stuart that Emily had decided to file for divorce. Stuart was stunned and didn't know what to say. It seemed to him that the remnants of his world had collapsed into an abyss, taking his hope with it. "Why," he managed to say after a long silence. "They're planning to get married," Martha said, embarrassed. Stuart felt like he couldn't breathe. He asked Martha to cool back, and after turning off his phone, threw it into the corner of the room. Slowly, he walked to his grandfather's old chest of drawers, opened the top drawer, and took out an antique straight razor with a beautiful bone handle. Stuart ran his finger along the blade to make sure it was still as sharp as it was years ago, and started to think. He imagined himself making just one thin cut and finally getting rid of the pain in his heart. Bitter thoughts, loneliness at night, and endless suffering. Someone knocked on the gate, and fast footsteps approached. Penelope appeared on the threshold with a large bundle in her hands. "Are you out of your mind, Stuart?" she shouted. "Don't even think about it," she cried, rushing towards him and snatching the razor from his hand. "Why? Why did you want to do that? Everything was so good." "Are you kidding at me?" "You all say that, but in reality you pity me. What good is it to be without feet and not be able to live my life to the fullest?" He shouted and hit his stumps with all his might. Penelope froze in horror and helplessness, not knowing how to react. Then she suddenly came to her senses and unfolded the bundle she had brought with her. 2 prostheses and crutches fell out onto the floor. "This is what Aunt Helen asked you to deliver," stuttered Penelope, and kneeling down, she attached the prostheses to Stuart's legs. "These are left from her late husband." Penelope helped Stuart to stand up, handed him the crutches, and he, unsteadily, moving on his artificial legs, took a few steps. "Well done. See how great it is." Penelope rejoiced, tenderly observing every movement of Stuart. Stuart walked around the room, took a breather, and approached the girl. "Thank you. It's really not bad at all." He smiled and held Penelope close to him. The girl immediately hugged Stuart by the neck and kissed him. Regaining her senses, she recoiled in fear, but Stuart managed to grab her by the waist, pulled her close, and running his hand through her lush hair, brought the girl's face so close that their lips met again in a hot kiss. That night they spent together, for the first time as a couple. A week later, Stuart went to the city to divorce his wife and check on the business of the store. The divorce procedure went quickly, and Stuart, dryly saying goodbye to his ex-wife, quickly left the registry office. Emily tried to stop Stuart to ask for forgiveness, but he did not even look at her and walked past, tightly squeezing the crutches. Stuart called a taxi and went to the store. Entering inside, he looked around confusedly. The store was empty. There were some crumpled boxes and old, unsold parts lying on the dusty showcases. Stuart approached Graham, bent over the cash register, and hit the floor with a crutch with force. Graham looked up and recoiled in horror. "Stuart, if you're about Emily, then she." He started speaking nervously. "I'm not interested in those details." Stuart interrupted him. "I came about the store. I see things are not going well." Graham collected all the bills and small coins in the cash register, put them in a bag, and handed them to Stuart. "We need to sell the store," he said. "There are no buyers, no profits, only expenses. It's not up to you to decide. This is my store, and I will decide what to do with it. And believe me, I can handle this problem." Stuart sharply replied and left the store without saying goodbye. Stuart was sorry for his business. He had put great effort into this store, but there was nowhere to take the money for investing in it. The only solution could be a loan from the bank, but he doubted that he would be approved. At home he shared his doubts with Penelope, and the girl suddenly, as if remembering something, looked at him with wide-open eyes, and then, asking him to wait a little, ran out onto the street towards her house. She returned in a few minutes, and handed Stuart a large black key, clearly of antique workmanship, decorated with intricate carving. "Your grandfather asked me shortly before his death to keep this key and give it to you. I often came to see him, and he always talked about you. He also asked to pass on this key is from the chest that is hidden in the basement. I don't even know what could be there." "Well, okay, we'll see tomorrow," Stuart smiled. On the next morning, Stuart took out a flashlight, handed it to Penelope, and ordered her to follow him. In the kitchen, he lifted the heavy lid of the pantry, carefully descended, and as soon as he reached the ground, he shouted to Penelope to also come down. When they turned on the flashlight, the darkness dissipated, and in the corner, they saw traces of brickwork. After dismantling the bricks, they pulled out a small iron chest. The key turned with a creak in the hole, a click sounded, and Penelope gingerly lifted the lid off the chest. Inside was a small bag on a string. Stuart took it, untied it, and poured the contents into his palm. Penelope brought the flashlight closer and froze in amazement. On Stuart's palm, the sharp edges of real precious stones glistened and sparkled with different colors. Penelope and Stuart stood, admiring the incredible and mesmerizing sight, unable to look away, and everything that was happening seemed like a fairy tale dream to them. Having come to his senses, Stuart chose the biggest ruby from the pile of stones and gave it to Penelope. The girl accepted the gift and began to admire it. "You know," I remembered. "My grandfather once told me about his youth. He worked in the mines, but I never thought that he hid his findings and kept them for so many years." Stuart took a final look at the exquisite treasure, neatly folded the stones back into the bag, and smiled contentedly. He felt confident again and hoped that everything would be fine for them now, as he could use the inheritance to get the store out of debt, improve the business, and buy himself the most modern prosthesis. "Will you marry me?" he suddenly asked Penelope. "We will sell the stones, leave here, and start a new, happy life. Do you agree?" "Of course, my love. If you only knew how long I've been waiting for this, she whispered, and hugging Stuart around the neck, buried her face in his chest. Stuart hugged the girl tightly and realized that all the pain and heaviness of the past few months after the accident was finally leaving. Love helped him forget about despair, betrayal, and disappointment, filling his soul with the long-forgotten feeling of incredible, I'm not telling my story to be pitied. After all, everything that happened is my life, and I certainly don't need pity. I am a one-woman man in my life. I've always taken marriage very seriously, maybe even too seriously. I never walked away from my wife because I never saw anyone around except my only wife. And there was no need for it, no desire for it either. Although I must admit that many women tried, but she gave me, and now about everything in order. I met my future wife in the early 90s, among the guests at a wedding of a friend of mine, and fell in love with her immediately. We dated her for 6 months and then decided to get married. We had a modest wedding and were over the moon. Our marriage was her second. She had developed a relationship with her ex-husband a year before we met. Something didn't work out there. I did not go to her with questions because I thought that there was no reason to stir up her soul, and she almost never said anything. By the way, my wife is a beautiful, smart woman and a great hostess. I was really lucky. When we got married, the whole country was in shambles. There were no normal, stable jobs. She was a medic and worked in a military unit, and I, apart from my main job, managed to work in 2 other places. It seemed to come out not bad. I wanted very much that the family had no need. From the first day I met my wife, I was very touchy about her. He loved her, but madly. In the truest sense of the word, he carried her in his arms. I considered her the closest and dearest person to me. 2 years of our life together had passed, but it didn't work out with children. It hurt her very much. She was very upset. She prophesied to me that I would leave her because of her own infertility. She was diagnosed with fallopian tubes. It was a terrible blow to her. But I did not despair. I was there for her, supported her, calmed her down. I told her she was my destiny and that I loved her more than life. I reassured her that I could do everything necessary to make her successful as a mother. After all, medicine can do a lot these days. She believed me, smiled at me, and for the sake of her smile, I was ready to give myself, just to make her happy. At the time, I was working very hard. I had a goal. I worked hard to reach it. I constantly needed money for various examinations by different doctors, consultations at institutes to buy medicines. We went and had several surgeries in different clinics, all sorts of witch doctors there and everything. Each time I believed that this time everything would happen and my wife would finally get pregnant. And then we would have a real life. But in spite of our efforts, nothing worked. It took almost 5 years. My wife lost all hope and put up with it. But me, I have always been an optimist and never gave up. I continued to believe in a miracle. My energy gave my wife strength. She always told me that it was easy for her to be with me. I could look forward to tomorrow with confidence and courage. I believed her because I thought she was the person I was born to be with. And I must live my life for her. She is my strong backbone and my unbreakable bastion. If she is there, then I will overcome everything and be able to do anything. One day my wife and I read an article about the Human Reproduction Institute and the possibility of artificial insemination. This idea gave us new hope, new impetus, and strength to strive for our cherished goal. I was ready to turn the earth upside down and was more confident than ever that this time everything would work out for sure. The surgery itself and the rehabilitation period was, by my standards at the time, well, very expensive. So I began to look for a way to earn the required amount. The city we have a small and special choice was not, but I once came across an ad in one of the magazines and it sounded as follows: Reserve soldiers, we invite you to serve under contract, decent wages, and so on. In general, they were recruiting tools to do certain kinds of work in certain places and paid very good money for the work. I did my compulsory military service in the Marines, and God bless me. Of course, I was not particularly raving about patriotic ideas, so I wasn't burning with a desire to lay down my life for somebody's political interests either. I just needed tools and resources to achieve our goal. In general, I thought about it and decided to take a risk. My wife cried and did not want to let me go. She was afraid and said that if something happened to me, she would not need the money later. And I was explaining that, unfortunately, we were not born into millionaire families and no one will ever give us anything for nothing in this life, unless you come and take it yourself. I calmed her down, told her that everything would be all right, because we need this money not for trinkets, but for a good cause. In general, I traveled to faraway places, wasn't home for a long time, but came back with what was needed. I was lucky, and I did not lay my head down, nor did I take sins on my soul. And then my wife and I went to the institute, had an operation, and oh miracle, it happened, which we were so alone. My wife got pregnant, I rejoiced. Soon our daughter was born. We were happy, just madly. I was literally flying on wings, working and doing almost everything around the house, helping not with the baby, because it was my pleasure, and I did not notice any worries at all. My wife said that I was an eternal engine, and I really wanted to surround her and my daughter with every kind of care. And soon I got a good and decent stable job and started earning good money. I bought a car for my wife. We moved to a bigger apartment, and every year we traveled to the seas and oceans. We spent all our free time together, tried to make up our leisure time, trips to the countryside, to the movies, skiing, skating rink, etc., so my girls wouldn't get bored. Thinking back to those days, it seemed to me here was a candy truck rolling over on our street, and we deserved it. That's how 14 years of our life together passed, and how happy I thought it would be. My daughter was slowly growing up. Family always came first for me. Everything was just for my loved ones. I never felt that my life is ordinary, that it is monotonous. Scandal in the family has never been. I respect for my wife avoided even a reason for her discontent, and if something she did not like the little things, went first to a compromise. I always tried to pay attention to her as a woman. I do not remember a day when I did not tell her how much I loved her and how much I valued her. When we were poor, I always found an opportunity to make her pleasant surprises, with or without cause. Flowers, small gifts, and various girlish trinkets. She always liked it so much. In bed with my spouse, everything was fine too. I am not conservative, and it seemed to me that we are absolutely open, that we trust each other. I tried to be sensitive to all my wife's interest, and in my opinion, everything was very harmonious. And she herself always said that she was happy with everything, and that I fully satisfy her needs. And now a word about jealousy. I can say that I have never been jealous of her. She never gave me any reason to be, even though she worked as a medic in an almost male-dominated team, a military unit. In my work, I periodically went on long business trips for a week and a half, or even 2 weeks. I always looked forward to returning home to my beloved. She, too, always met me with joy and awe. And then? Then everything was like in the movies or anecdotes. One day I was flying on business on another expedition, and in the city where I had to change flights. I received a message from my colleagues that my work was canceled, and I had to return home. I flew back to my city in the afternoon, bought a small bouquet of roses and champagne, and decided to surprise my wife without telling her. By my count, she was still at work, and my daughter at school. I took a cab home, started to open the door with a key. but the door was locked from the inside. I thought, well, there's no surprise. Started ringing the doorbell, zero emotion. Knocked and rang, began to worry, not understanding what was happening. I even wanted to call the police, but finally my wife's voice asked me from the door, "Who's there?" I said, "Honey, what are you? Why are you scaring me?" "It's me. I canceled a business trip." Even then I thought she was asleep or maybe sick. And then she opened the door, and I did not recognize her, and it was a completely different person. Her eyes were alien. She looked as if I was not there, as if through me. I went into the hallway, and through the open door into the hall, I saw some military officer sitting in an armchair. Only then did I notice that my wife was wearing a naked robe, and suddenly I realized everything. She told me in a calm tone, "You're bleeding." I saw that the stinging bouquet was growing with such force that I literally squeezed it through my fingers. For the first time in my life, my legs trembled so much. So much so that I just sat down at the door on the floor. It's hard for me to describe in words how I felt at that moment. I couldn't breathe. I was suffocating. There was a tornado of thought in my head and everything. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe my eyes. It didn't seem like it was happening to me, because it just couldn't happen to me at all. My wife is not capable of that. Then she said, "We need to talk. I hope you're not going to make a scandal. He's not guilty of anything." But me, I couldn't even stand up at that minute, let alone scandalize. If I'd had a fit of rage, I probably would have done something irreparable. But now I realize, thank God, that I didn't. I didn't see him disappear from the apartment unnoticed. My wife and I stayed behind. She sat down on her knees in front of me and said, "This happens in life." And she cried. I'd remember bits and pieces of what she told me. "I can't live like this anymore. I'm confused. I want to repent to you. You're good. I am bad. You are unworthy." Then she began to tell me how many times in her whole life she had cheated on me. I had thoughts that she wanted to destroy me. She went on. She told me that the very first time was with her ex-husband. In the beginning of our relationship, when she and I first started dating. She said she met her ex intentionally and gave herself to him to prove to him what kind of woman he had lost. Then she cheated on me with some military medic in another city when I did a refresher course. She gave herself to him out of pity. He was very romantic and was suffering. Suffering because he had recently divorced his wife. Read the elements to her. Then there was another military doctor, but already in our town. Then another and finally came to the last one with whom I actually caught them our house. She told me that they had been having an affair for almost a month and that she had wanted to break up with him. But she hadn't had time. She said they always met at work and that she was nasty because she desecrated our house and so on. When I listened to her, I asked, "Why did you do this to me?" She sobbed straight into a screen and said she couldn't explain to me the reasons for her actions. It is an inexplicable passion, and there is no excuse for it, and it is up to me to make the decision. At the same time, she swore that if I could find the strength to forgive her, she would be faithful to me to the grave. For the first few days, I couldn't sleep or eat at all. Like a robot, I went to work, came home, just lay there and stared at the ceiling. At night, I was drenched in cold sweat, drinking water and smoking nonstop. I did not touch alcohol, by the way. My colleagues asked me what happened. They said I was all black. My wife saw what was happening to me and constantly cried and begged for forgiveness. I didn't know what to say to her, so I kept quiet. I didn't know where to go or where to fail. My head wasn't working at all. Later, I was going to talk to her many times, to share my soul with her as I always had before, to tell her how much I loved her, but I couldn't find the right words. There was a lump in my throat that I couldn't help but spit out and swallow. 6 months went by like that. During that time, I kept thinking and remembering our life. Dating inside myself, looking for answers. Maybe it was me. I was doing something wrong. I chewed myself out of the whole guilt complex at the time. During that time, I had given up on my wife both emotionally and physically. The thought of sexual intimacy with her never even occurred to me. I became afraid of having sex with her. I don't know how to explain it. It seemed to me that I was not able to satisfy her. That's why there was no reason to go to bed. It would only embarrass me. We communicated with her on domestic topics. To my daughter, I allocated attention without prejudice as before. Most of all, I wanted my daughter not to suspect anything. At that time, she was at the beginning of her teenage years and I didn't want to hurt her because she had nothing to do with the circumstances. Then later, the emotions went away and the pain in my soul somewhat subsided. One day, I decided to talk to my wife and told her that I did not hold a grudge against her, that I loved her just as much. I told her that what happened probably changed something in me. But so far, I can't figure out what it is. I guess it takes time. I asked my wife to promise me that if life with me didn't turn out the way she wanted it to, that she would tell me right away. I won't hold back. There was no time to waste. Life is one, and things can still work out differently and with another person. We became close again, but not the way we were. I tried to be the same as before, but in bed with his wife began incomprehensible problems with potency. It made me gnaw on myself even more. So another 6 years went by, and the family was always in the first place for me. And the question of whether it was cheating on me or not, I stopped wondering. She was just as beautiful, smart, a great hostess, and a good mom. Yes, I forgave her, but something didn't break you. Everything in the soul came out. Empty. This poison poisoned me to the bone. My unbreakable bastion collapsed like a house of cards. And somehow the feeling of new did not. In time, I became a different person. The true meaning of the word treason is that everything has changed. I had changed. I remembered with a smile the days when I wandered far and wide, earning money to give birth to my daughter. Back then, I had the phrase written on my backpack unloading. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. After a while, I suddenly stopped feeling the inner weight that had been weighing me down for so long. It's all strange, really strange. I tried to comprehend and understand what had kept me from changing my life before. I don't know. I had always been an optimist and believed in the best. I hoped that things would settle down and be okay. And it did settle down, but at the same time, something very important left my soul. The very thing that gave meaning to the existence of our marriage. The very thing that motivated me to keep going. My stupid responsibility dictated that I couldn't drop everything and just walk out, because that would be a betrayal. But it was, no, not a betrayal. Just like that, suddenly and all of a sudden my attitude toward everything that had happened was different. I suddenly felt that my inner changes in my head had come to an end. It was as if I had woken up from oblivion. I realized that for a long time, I had not been living my life at all. A complete stranger to me. My wife, who was sleeping beside me, I looked at her sleeping, at her face. I realized I didn't know this woman anymore. I left home that morning, turned off my phone, drove around town, stood on the roadsides in the woods. It's hard to explain, but somehow I felt at ease. I felt like a bird out of its cage. It felt like I had paid for all my mistakes in full. I thought and remembered and became more and more aware of my freedom. In the evening, I returned home, where I informed my wife of everything. There was a long talk, but no recriminations. She cried and said she had been waiting for this day all the time. Strangely enough, I no longer felt pity for her. I correctly explained to her my understanding of life at that moment, and she told me hers. She asked for forgiveness over and over again, and I told her that I had forgiven her long ago, but that I was no longer the man she had married. We lived almost 23 years. All 15 years until the breaking point, I lived only for her and my daughter. In the next 8 years, I don't even remember. In all that time, I never once reproached her for anything. I lived through everything, but during that time, a lot has changed, especially my understanding and attitude towards everything. I realized that further marriage with her was a waste of time. My daughter grew up and almost jumped out of the family nest. The wife came to terms with it. I think she realized that our paths had parted long ago, and we just went side by side by inertia. But to be objective, there were good things in our life. While I was in the dark, nothing existed for me. I was happy. We finalized the divorce. I explained everything to my daughter. She is old enough now and understood everything. We continue to see her much more often than we see our wife. Life goes on, and the emptiness that echoed in my soul for so long, it no longer rings. There is no permanent woman. I'm afraid, and I don't want one. Now I know for sure that what doesn't kill us all at once, it makes us invalids. Dear friends, our next audio story has come to an end. Frankly speaking, I liked this story, and in 2 words, I will tell you why. First, I was expecting at most 1 or 2 betrayals from my wife, but as I read this list, it made me, how can I tell you, feel the greatest pity for her. And even for a second, I felt like I was in the main character's shoes. God forbid, I even remember having that same emotion come over me during the recording. I hope nothing was audible, but that's for you to judge. The story of the main character's life itself. In the process of reading the text, it made me deeply disgusted. After all, is it normal? You fell in love with a woman and did not even ask about her past, especially since she was married. Naively believing, risking your life for the sake of happiness, the questionable happiness of your couple. Overall, the way he behaved cannot be called worthy of a man, I believe. Plus, there is one inconsistency. Look, he risked his life in hot spots, and when he sought his lover in I emphasize, in his house, the poor guy was dumbfounded and crouched on the carpet, that he didn't even see the lover leave the apartment. And in general, what do you think? Is it okay to then live 8 years together and feel like nothing because of day to day? Of course, what pleased me, if you can say so at all, was the ending. He somehow found the strength to leave his wife. But does that count as courage? That's a ridiculous question. What do you think of his behavior? Do you think you could have noticed before that his wife was like a March cat on every corner, making horns? You could take it and drink it. And by tradition, if you liked the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to comment. I always answer you in the comments. And also listen to your suggestions, and in general, your activity makes me not to stop and record stories every day. Well, see, she would put on her underwear and run home to hide her secret from her husband. But what was the secret? Today, we will tell you life stories and accounts of how wives are forced to use different ways to take pity on their husbands. Are you ready to find out the truth? I want to tell you a very ambiguous story, although some might not call it ambiguous. It was about a kiss, and you can say 100 years ago, which resulted in a worse than nuclear war. To help you understand the whole picture, I am 40 years old, my wife Elizabeth 36, and of course, has a child 10 years old. Everything is fine with money and so on. The beginning of the whole story, if of course, you can believe my dear wife, was one evening on February 23rd. Our colleagues in the organization and I, of course, congratulated each other. A little by the evening, we celebrated the whole thing in the workplace. The girls at work set the table for us. I call my wife. Liz, we are here. Well, this is the very little. If you have a chance, after work, come straight here for me. We'll celebrate here a little bit. Well, you can pick me up and drive, so I don't have to leave my car here. I'm good. If I'd known how this simple request of mine would end, I wouldn't have drank at all, and I would have picked up whoever and wherever I wanted at once. Long or short, the dinners at work that night were also a humbling event. They were there too, congratulating the staff. In general, we had more bottles of cognac that evening than expected, and some of our young people here began to play the bottle. Well, like young people play, and we are older just for fun. We are sitting. Anyway, I think it's time to write to my wife. Where are you? She's texting me. I'm getting in a cab. I'll be right there. Okay. I take some more cognac, stand closer to the exit. There's a window, at least to get some air, and the sleeves on my shirt, of course, are already rolled up. Mine and everyone else's is fine. All of a sudden, one of our youngest madams comes up, and she calls me by my name and patronymic. Anyway, there's that bottle there pointed at me, and well, she kind of has to kiss me here, and in general, not really expecting an answer from me, takes my chin right with two hands and kisses me, without taking away from me and turning her head to the staff. Well, sort of, so that they can see that she has completed this task. Well, as you have already realized, of course, at this point, my wife walks in as well. Oil painting. We're kind of standing there with this madam, just the two of us. It all looks like we stepped away from the collective for some business. We both smell of alcohol. Well, the last moments of the kiss, I think the wife saw perfectly well too. I pretended as if nothing had happened. There really wasn't anything going on. I had nothing to do with it, but it wasn't. While Lisa and my wife and I were in the car, we were talking as if nothing had happened. In fact, I figured we'd probably talk tomorrow, if we talked at all, and for nothing. The next day, my wife was already blacker than a cloud. I somehow explained to her what it was, and after a couple of days, well, kind of believed me. I exhaled, but it turned out far from that. A month goes by to 6 months, and every time, on occasion, and without it, my wife immediately reminds me of this case, and because of these reminders, fight more. I told her if she did not forgive me, she could have told me so, instead of forgiving at first, and then reminding me every day. As soon as I said that and got really angry, she immediately took a step back, saying that she was kidding and that she would relax. But if the quarrel again, she immediately reminds me of it all again. In short, found a string, how to act on the nerves. Here, so to speak, as it is impossible, I turned out to her something like a promotion. She had been working in a jewelry store, and after an employee in their larger office went on maternity leave, Elizabeth was offered the job. The neighborhood was a little farther from home, but the pay was higher and so on. I generally agreed without asking me, and the schedule was from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the schedule was 3 days through 3. I, by the way, paid attention at once. It was the first time I had ever heard of such a schedule, but later found out what kind of schedule, well, what hobbies, except work, there were dinners. Anyway, it's been a year and a half, and then she walks into our lounge in the evening and says, "I'm sick of it all." At first I thought the conversation was about work. You don't give me any time or attention at all. Well, don't make promises that you will now. You're an adult, you can't be changed. I've made up my mind. I've been thinking for a long time. In short, the point is that I have to go out now. Of course, I'm shocked. The next day, I try to talk again, and she is not, all in the same spirit. Torture my presence. To cut a long story short, I was not going to torture anyone. I decided to go to a friend's house for a couple of weeks at their empty house. It happens that people get bored with each other, and as a result, we make up. But it turned out to be much more interesting. We are sitting with a friend at this dacha, and with his encouragement, we come to the conclusion that there is something for a reason. It has been a week and a half. The wife, in terms of communication, doesn't even scratch the surface. Yes, and crowned, we need a break from each other. In such stories usually means something else. Anyway, I think, well, did someone show up? My friend definitely thinks so. And in my brain, at once her surfaces schedule 3 days in three. Long or short, it looks like she has someone. And that someone is connected to her at this exact time. 3 days in three, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. What to do? I called the next day at my wife's to talk. But no, she stayed in the position she was in. We'll take a break from each other, but we'll decide sometime later too. Yeah, sure. But anyway, there's nothing to do. I take my friend's car and drive right up to the driveway at 8 in the morning so I can actually see where she's going and when. She gets out in the morning, jumps in a cab, and goes to this job of hers. I walk her there, driving to mine. Then in the evening, I decide to go to her place again and see who will give her a ride home from work tonight. Well, if she got a ride. But in the situation repeats itself again. I can't follow my wife around indefinitely. I am also at work. In fact, there is no evidence. I have no guarantees that this is not nothing, and I do not do nonsense. In short, again, we are sitting at the cottage with a friend, and it has been almost a month. I come to our house and see my son, but Elizabeth doesn't say yes or no. I wouldn't want to talk about it now. Let's get through these days, and then we'll see what and where it takes us. Okay, imagine what I have to do. I mean, there's no reason to get divorced. But it's not a life together under these conditions either. But fortunately, this epic is still over. This same friend calls me and asks the address of the salon where his wife works. Listen, he said, it's all so cool and big. Where is it located? I need to buy a gift certificate. And while I'm there, maybe out of your tears, I'll talk to you. I gave him that address, the phone number. He called me back 2 hours later and told me his wife wasn't there. 2 counselors are there and no one from the bosses. But it's probably not her shift. I tell him, but my heart is restless. I take the car and go to the house. I come home and there is no one at home. Where is she then? I call her, she doesn't answer. I call her parents and she's not there either. The time had already come for the evening. I get in the car, go to her work, drove up, stood far away, waited. 8 p.m. comes up. I see Lisa coming out of the salon. And there's a guy next to her looking maybe 20 or 25. They go to his bad weather expensive and honest stamp. And in fact, they get in. I will not describe my emotions. They were contradictory. Well, on the one hand, at least I knew that my suspicions were not groundless. Well, on the other hand, I wanted to go out and ask questions directly. But luckily, I held back at the time. As it turned out, rightly so. I'm sitting here wondering where, in fact, they're going. They drove home. He dropped her off in front of our driveway and left. I immediately picked her up, parked my car right there, and went straight up to our house. Opened the door with my key. She was already on her phone with someone. I took the cell phone out of her hand, and while it was unlocked, I went to her message. For this month, while she's been out here, let's say walking around, apparently, my return wasn't really expected. So all the messages with this young, handsome guy, she did not delete at all. Anyway, I read everything in there. It turns out that in this main office, there is a management office. And this boy is actually, well, he's the son of one of the executives of this network. That's actually why you don't see him going up to her house. They had an office right at work for that. Now I see. That's actually why my friend today, when he came to the jewelry store, he didn't find Lisa at her workplace. The work must have been done in the office. Anyway, I didn't see any tears or sobs that night. She didn't really deny it. On the contrary, she finally told me all the things they'd been thinking about me for the past 2 years. Of course, they remembered that kissed on February 23rd adding that that was just the tip of the iceberg. And supposedly, there's a bunch more betrayals behind me that she's sure she won't remember and figure out. That's it. Like I said, the whole situation is ambiguous. Somebody could say, it's your own fault. It was you on February 23rd kissed that lady. But I don't think that's a big deal. And it's a damn good excuse. And it's not a good excuse on February 23rd. He always thought his wife was just going to beauty salon treatments to keep her skin in shape. But when he happened to notice intimate treatments being performed right outside their apartment windows, but what he found out made him lose his head and raise a ruckus that all the neighbors in their building remembered. I want to tell you a truly detective story, witnesses, and even participants, which happened to be myself. Saturday evening, I received a phone call from a friend of mine. Where are you? What are you? How are you? Let's see you. We can even talk at my house. Or better yet, let's meet at the store first. I think that without the store, we will not make it here. All right. I got ready, got in a cab, and went to my friend's place. Anyway, after a short conversation, it turned out that he and his wife had had another fight. For the 10th or 20th time this month, I asked him approximately yes. And where is she now? I don't know. Turns out they've been having it for a month now. And each time, in order not to make this situation worse, Andrew goes to his office so that he and his wife alone would blow off steam, cool off. And he goes back to their house the next day, or every other day. And little by little, everything kind of calms down. But after a while, it's all over again. He leaves the house again. Of course, they disconnect their phones from each other at these moments. And this has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And then it coincided with the weekend. So, what do I tell him? And that I did not really want to ruin the weekend today, says Andre. But no matter how hard I tried, we still had a fight. I kind of left again. But then I decided to talk right away and make things work out. Call her. Her phone is off. Came home a couple of hours later. She's not home. Get it? Yeah. So we sat down with him for a while, finished what we brought from the store. It's outside. But for a second, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting there feeling that we were starting to sober up a little bit. We had a last drink of tea. And I said I was going home. Otherwise, yours will come. And we are sitting in this kind of well condition. Moreover, that you have already quarreled, not very much it will look from the outside. Although to return to her husband only in the morning is also not very from the outside. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We said goodbye. I threw on my jacket and went downstairs. Standing near their doorway. It's a little cold. It's early spring. I got out on purpose and didn't call a cab. I thought I would take a walk, get some air, have a smoke, but then I would go. I looked and there was no lighter in my pocket. I searched all my pockets, and there was definitely no lighter. It seems to be on Andre's balcony, and those back to his 3rd floor. The last thing I wanted now. Moreover, I look out the window. The light at Andrew is not lit. Probably asleep. Okay. And I see in their yard in front of Andrew's new house, there is a car with the lights on and parked in the so-called 2nd row. But it means kind of came recently. And for sure there is someone inside. I come up in the back. I see the front window as ajar. I said, buddy, they're gonna be lighters. He reached for the ceiling light in the car and turned on the interior light. I'm standing outside in the dark and can't see me. I can see the cabin with the lights on pretty well. No one in the passenger seat. It's pushed all the way forward. I hear a lady's voice coming from the back seat. She said to my date, okay, you gotta go. I'll call you. And she kissed the driver on the cheek. I leaned over to look and the lady had already opened kind of the back door, but also kind of on her way out. I looked closer. It's Marinka. I think it's Andrea. I immediately turned my back to them. I hear her get out of the car, slam the back door. Well, and goes to his entrance home. That's right. The driver couldn't find a lighter, started the car, and told me that yes, now the cigarette lighter. I was sobered up by such surprises from Marinka, and I thought that I should make friends with this friend. I wonder if it's a brother or some colleague at work. And now I'll take Andrew. Although why would she then was a colleague to kiss something? Okay, I hear it. And his car chain noise. Well, when he started the car, I could hear it under the hood. And I said to him, that's the chain. They have a problem area. Yes, we allegedly, when we worked in the service in the non-existent, when we came often on these, the owners often thought that the matter was moving towards a full-blown engine overhaul, but it turned out not. He tells me yes. And I was getting kind of wary too. So back and forth, we talked a little bit. I said, that's it. I should go home. It's time. Which way are you going now? He told me the direction. I told him I was going that way too. Let's go. Let's go. Do you mind if I sit in the back? They're going to stop the smell of alcohol and all that. Okay. I get in the back. I see the front passenger seat is definitely in an unnatural position for him. It's too far forward. Anyway, we're driving along. We're talking. I'm telling him about his date. Pretty girl, you know, got a girlfriend. He says she's got a lot of things. Are we laughing? Okay. I run my left hand over the back seat. And I feel like there's nothing there. I look and we're pretty far gone. I think it's time for me to get out too. Okay. There's a junction coming up. I tell him. And after the stop, I came all turned on my phone flashlight. I look and on the floor directly behind the driver's seat is a hairbrush. Obviously not a man's, but I think let it be evidence. If everything is confirmed and if it doesn't, I'll call and I'll give it back. We exchanged phone numbers with the driver. He said if there was a problem with the engine, he could call. I went out and called my friend to whom the wife returned in the morning. Andrew did not pick up the phone. I took a cab back to the house. The next day, Andrew called back himself, but there was no sensation. I told him about how last night I had fun investigating the alleged cheating and that I even have proof of a sort, but it turned out that Marinka herself took and told him I got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Andrew could there in an unsuitable state for such a conversation in short. As a result, they and his friends, all what they think and everything as it is said, that's pretty much it. The only really unpleasant thing about this story is that there is no consistency. First, they should have broken up and then they should have thrown their comms, walking around at least until morning. If you like this story, don't forget to rate it and give it a like.